We are so honored to welcome Katie Longboat, who is a Mohawk and Cree beadwork artist originally from Six Nations of the Grand River. Katie's beadwork incorporates intricate designs, contemporary materials, and bold colors to create unique jewelry pieces and beaded artwork. She is inspired to create work that is reflective of her family and background, her travels, the natural world, and draws inspiration from both Cree and Haudenosaunee styles of beadwork. Currently residing in Toronto, Katie's passionate about sharing her knowledge of beadwork through teaching beading classes and workshops. Earlier this year, OASW embarked on a collaboration with Katie to create a series of original pieces of beaded artwork, driven by our commitment to advancing meaningful dialogue and action on reconciliation. Inspired by the concepts of moving forward together and OASW's values of equity integration, these pieces are intended to serve as an enduring visual reminder and catalyst for critical reflection and conversation on the importance of truth and reconciliation and our ongoing personal and professional journeys towards this goal. We are so elated that these pieces of artwork will appear in our member communications, on the cover of our 2022 to 2027 strategic plan, which is soon to be released, on our website and hung in the OASW office for all to see. And we are so honored to have Katie with us here today to reflect on her work, identity, and artistic vision, and the meaning behind her beadwork and its connection to mental health, healing, and wellness. So with that, welcome, Katie. I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to OASW for inviting me today and featuring my beadwork. I'm really excited to talk about the pieces and also share with you a few beadwork pieces from the past and some of the work that I've worked on a few years ago and the stories behind that. So my background is in mental health, counseling, and community work. I spent 5 years as a child and youth counselor at the Urban Indigenous Education Center through the Toronto District School Board. Previous to that, I worked in community as a housing support worker and worked with youth who were struggling with substance abuse and mental health challenges. And right now I am on leave from my position and I am at York University, and I'm actually graduating. Well, I'm graduating in the fall, but I'm finished the program in 3 weeks, and I'll be graduating with my Bachelor of Education, as well as qualifications to apply to OCT to teach. So I'm a teacher candidate right now, and really enjoying this next sort of step in my life of a career change. Alongside that, I'm also a beadwork artist. I'm not formally trained as an artist. I'm self-taught, and my work has been recognized at the Textile Museum of Canada, the Ukrainian Museum of Ontario, and the Thunder Bay Art Gallery, and was featured on the cover of Chatelaine alongside Buffy St. Marie. I also teach beading classes in the Indigenous community on a regular basis for different organizations. And I also enjoy beading just as a hobby and as a way to take care of myself. I do beadwork. I practice beadwork pretty much on a daily basis. I'll be working on something, whether I'm in Zoom class or I just have a couple hours in the evening. It's a big part of my life. So this afternoon, I'm going to be telling you a few stories about my family, about my life, my beadwork journey, and stories about a specific project I did in 2018. This project connected a lot to my healing and my reconnecting to myself, my family, and my identity. And at the end, hopefully, well, there'll be a time in the middle as well, and at the end to answer any questions that you might have about what you heard today. So my story begins, here's a few pictures of me as a kid with my brother and with my grandparents. I was born in Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. That's about an hour southwest of Toronto. I was raised partly on the reserve, partly in the States, and mostly in Toronto. So I've been living here and going to school here and working here for the past 25 years. My father's side of the family is Mohawk, and they're from Six Nations. And my mom's side of the family is Cree Nation, and they're from Northern Ontario. My mom grew up in a little town called Makina, Ontario. Her parents, so my grandparents, are from Treaty 9 territory, Fort Albany First Nation. And I've been learning a little bit more about my grandparents in recent years. And what I learned was that they traveled down from Fort Albany on the river, and they settled in Long Lake, Ontario, where all the Indigenous people who were traveling to that area were then moved to Constance Lake First Nation. So although they are registered band members to Constance Lake First Nation, that was based on where they had traveled down to, but originally they're from Fort Albany. My grandparents, they had 16 children, and they settled in that area, Long Lake and eventually Makina, Ontario, which is about 4 hours north of Thunder Bay. So me, when I was growing up, from when I could remember until about 14 or 15 years old, I knew that I was Indigenous, but I didn't have a connection to culture. I heard my grandparents spoke Cree, fluent Cree, and I heard that growing up. Nobody, but I didn't know how to speak either of my languages, Mohawk or Cree, and neither did my parents. I didn't go to ceremonies. Sometimes my dad would smudge in the house, but I didn't know what it meant to smudge. And the connection that I did have as a young person was that my grandmother worked, my grandmother on my dad's side worked at the Friendship Center here in Toronto. So I learned a few things from going to camp, kids camp at the Native Center, hearing the drumming, but for the most part, I was largely disconnected from language and culture, and always felt like I didn't know too much. And the reason for that is because both sides of my family were largely impacted by residential schools, forced assimilation, and we lost a lot of that knowledge through the generations. So it wasn't until I was a teenager where I started to feel this pull to learn more about my identity and who I was. So in the city, what was accessible to me was powwow dancing. So powwow dancing wasn't too much in my family. I think a couple of my family members danced at powwows, but that's what I seen around me. That's what a few of my friends were doing. So I decided I wanted to learn how to powwow dance. So I started with fancy shawl dancing, and then eventually I wanted to start to build my regalia. And a lot of the dancers that you see at powwows, they have the beaded accessories, beaded earrings, fully beaded yokes and leggings and moccasins. So this is how I started to learn how to bead, and my interest in beading started. And I really wanted to create my own regalia.
I can't get my volume down.
We've got someone who's unmuted themselves, so I'm just going to pop in and just make sure that everyone is muted.
Okay, sorry about, I got a little distracted. So I wanted to learn how to make my own accessories. So that's how I started to bead. I went to a local beading class, and a friend of mine, actually we're still friends today, she taught me how to bead, and I started to do little hair clips and hair ties and earrings. I started to bead a lot more, and it started to take on a bigger meaning in my life, like as I got older. And when I first started, I started beading what I seen around me. So a lot of the popular designs in the powwow circle were geometric designs. So I didn't know what the meaning of geometric designs were when I was that age. So I would just bead what I seen. And then I started to make jewelry. I started to create necklaces and try different stitching and take different classes. Actually, my father's a jeweler. So I really took an interest to creating jewelry and being inspired by him. And then I started to get into making more artwork with beadwork. So beadwork that is mounted onto canvas, and that could be in a gallery. So my work has morphed into different things over the years. I also started to teach beading in my early 20s, mid 20s. I actually started to be at the Friendship Center, the Native Canadian Center, and ran that group for a while. I also started to bring my beadwork into schools and teaching with the students in school. And I wanted to also touch on quickly a little bit of what beadwork is in any case that you haven't seen beadwork before, but it is working with small beads onto fabric or onto leather, and embroidering them into the leather to create regalia or to create artwork or jewelry. There are traditional styles of beadwork. They might use materials like quills, hide, stone beads. They might use cultural or ceremonial designs that have meaning. Regalia could be through family designs that were passed down, or beadwork common to the area. So for example, beadwork in Six Nations might look different than beadwork from the North, because Haudenosaunee styles of beadwork has a very distinct look. So they have more raised beadwork. So beadwork that's raised off of the foundation, whereas Northern style beadwork is flat. So it has distinct looks, and you might be able to tell where that person is from based on the beadwork that they're wearing or based on the beadwork that they're creating. So I will move on to my slides here. So going back to the project that I did in 2018. So just a little background, I had been asked to create a beaded project for an exhibition in Toronto that was at the Textile Museum. And so when I started thinking about this project, I knew that I wanted to create something that represented the Cree side of my family, so my mom's side of the family. So in the early development of this project, I started asking questions and talking to my mom and talking to my aunties and uncles. And one theme that I began to see was that there was a time in our family where the traditional knowledge was lost and the language was lost. Not completely, because there are still some members of my family who have picked up that traditional knowledge, but for the most part, a lot of that knowledge was lost. And so my drive behind this project was to try to reconnect in some way and learn about my grandparents. So here's a photo of my mom's side of the family, and on the left is my grandmother. And she's on the far left, and she's tanning a moose hide with her friend. My grandparents are in the middle, and their names were Sam and Imelda Wesley. And my aunties and uncles are in the next picture on the right. So they had 16 children. They had a big family, and my mom and her two siblings are on the far right. So they are all now settled all across Canada. I have family everywhere. I can go visit my cousins in the West Coast and the East Coast. So that's a little snapshot of my mom's side of the family. My grandparents had gone to residential school, but at the same time, they carried a lot of that traditional knowledge beyond residential school. So they continued to speak their Cree language. They continued to practice their traditional knowledge of hunting, trapping, tanning moose hides, and beading. My grandparents were also devout Christians. They went to church, and they were close with the church members who, according to my mom, asked them to stop teaching the children how to speak Cree. So my older aunties and uncles know, they can understand, but the younger siblings, they don't know how to speak Cree. My grandmother was a beater. She was a leather worker. She tanned her own hides from the moose my grandfather would hunt. And she made beautiful, beautiful pieces of beadwork of mittens, mucklucks, moccasins, jackets, vests. And people would travel to her community to seek out her beadwork. So they lived in a French community where there was on the outskirts and within the town, there was a lot of mills and there was the CN rail. So there was a lot of workers coming through, and they would actually stop by and say, do you have any work that we can buy? So this was how she supported the family, was through her work, her beadwork and artwork. So just gonna skip ahead a little bit. So in that summer of 2018, my friend, Lisa Myers, she was preparing an exhibition called Beads They're Sewn So Tight at the Textile Museum. And this was with 3 other artists. And so I began my work. So this is the first piece of beadwork that I created. This is the first of one of a series of 4. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to seek out my grandmother's beadwork and her garments or pieces that she created, because what happened was after she passed away, this was 22 years ago now that she's been gone, her work was spread out amongst different family members. So different family members had her beadwork, but a lot of the times they were protected. They were in storage bins, in plastic garment bags, put away, understandably so, because if they're left out, they can get moth-eaten and dusty. So in my mind, I wanted to seek out those pieces. I wanted to talk to my aunties and uncles and ask to see any of the beadwork that they had of my grandmother's. So the first person I went to was my aunt Frances, and she is in Thunder Bay. And on the left-hand side of your screen, that's my grandmother's beadwork. And it is on a large jacket. This jacket must have been 3X. It was very big. And she made the jacket from start to finish, from tanning the moose hide to cutting to piecing together and creating the beadwork. And this is just on the one of the shoulders, but there was beadwork all over this jacket. It was really, really beautiful. And conversations I had with my aunt were her memories. So she shared her stories with me about memories of her mom, and her memories of her working on her work and working on the hides. So my interpretation on the right, this is my beadwork, and what I really wanted to do with this project was, one, I wanted to honor her work. I wanted to honor her work through recreating her designs. And in Indigenous communities, at least in families who bead, it's very common for families to pass down designs. So a mother who creates certain flowers, is really common for her sons or daughters to also create those same patterns, so that those patterns are passed down not only within their nation, but also within their family. And for me, I felt like I never had that opportunity, because she had passed away when I was 14 and I hadn't even learned how to bead yet. So I never got the chance to learn from her. So in this way, I was honoring her work, but I was also learning from her and learning her patterns and being able to bead her patterns and feel that generational passing down. So this piece is 6 by 6 inches. There's some florals in the background you can see that were also designs on the jacket. This is the next piece of beadwork, and this was from a pair of mittens. And this time I went to Calgary to visit my Aunt Annie, and it was the same summer. She's the eldest sister, and I sat down with her, and again we spoke about her memories, her stories, and of course, with each conversation, I asked permission to do this project and to share these stories. So on the right is my interpretation of this design. And I changed it a little bit. I added an extra flower at the top here. And one thing that is interesting, well, not interesting, but exciting about this piece is that I seen my Aunt Annie recently in May, and we went on vacation together. And then when I came back, I got a package in the mail, and she had sent me these mitts. So I actually have these mitts now, which is really, really special for me. This is the third piece of the 4 pieces. And this is special to me as well, because the vest on the left is a baby vest, and it's actually my brother's vest from when he was a baby. So his name is Skylar, and this vest is probably 40 years old, still in really, really great condition. And I took a bit more of a artistic interpretation with this one. On the right, you can see I bunched together 5 of those orange flowers. And this piece was really fun for me to do as well, because this color combination with the sort of light minty green, the blue and the orange, these aren't colors that I would usually choose to put together. I usually go for pink, teal, purples, bright yellows. So this color combo was interesting, because when I was shopping for those colors, I was looking at them and saying, oh, wow, like I would never normally choose these. But in some spiritual kind of way, I did feel, I thought about my grandmother and maybe how she might have been choosing her color choices, and thinking about her and what motivations she had to choose these colors. So it was really, this one was really special to me as well. This is the 4th piece, and this one came from an unfinished piece of beadwork. So my grandmother in her later years was diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's, and she was losing her ability to bead. And so she had this piece with her belongings that was unfinished. So it was either a part of a mukluk or part of a mitt. And so a cousin of mine had these in her possession, and I reached out to her to ask her if I can use an image for this project, and she actually mailed the pieces to me and said, well, you can have these. And so I was able to really look at the way that she did her stitching, and even the back, which had birch bark as interfacing. I found that really interesting. And so, yeah, it's a very, it represents her later work. And the fact that it's unfinished was really, for me, sad, but also touching, and also like an honor to have this unfinished piece. And I actually gave these away to I gave them back to my aunt in hopes that, you know, a younger cousin might one day finish it. And so my interpretation is on the right. And I really enjoyed this piece. As you might have noticed, also the background of each beaded panel, it has a lot of contouring. So I also added a bit of my own ideas into each piece. There's the 4 of them together. And so they hung this way on the wall. Very quickly, you know what, some of the things in this journey that I learned didn't actually didn't arise until after I finished all the beadwork. So I started with this idea of I wanted to learn more about my grandmother's beadwork, but along the way I had learned so many things about my family, my grandmother, but also about myself. So in reconnecting with who I was, in my reconnecting with my identity, and connecting to identity is also a form of wellness, a spiritual wellness. I felt, you know, really, really connected to who I was. And, you know, there's a feeling, and sorry, I'll mention first, when I first started to bead, I had mentioned that I was using designs from around me. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't know what I was really beading. I was beading geometric designs, which might have come from different nations, or, you know, just came from even different families. And to create these pieces and to know designs from my own family was really, really healing for me. And now I carry these designs and I use them a lot in my work. I'm thinking about more projects that I can use using Cree florals from my family. So yeah, it was an emotional journey. And I will mention that, you know, I'm still learning. And I think through art and through this process and learning about, you know, who my family is and who I am, has been really, really powerful, impactful, and healing for me. So I am looking at the time, and I just wanted to end this portion of the presentation. I know that we're going to be looking at the beadwork panels for the website. So maybe I was going to take a pause to ask for questions, if there's any questions, but maybe we'll share the panels first and then have some time for questions at the very end. Okay, so beautiful, beautiful image, beautiful photography. And so this is the first image. And I'll just talk about the size. So this size is 8 inches by 5 inches. And when thinking about the concept of moving forward together, I was thinking about symbols. So how can I use symbolism to represent this concept? And the first thing that came to me was growth, moving forward together in growing together. And so for this first piece, I wanted to incorporate elements of growth, which is the sun, of course. So the sun in the middle, which gives life to everything. The lands, so the green wavy part at the bottom was, represents the land. The moon, which is in the bottom left, and the sky represented in the teal colors and the clouds, and also wanted to represent the lightning and the thunder. So that's what the symbol of the purple and pink line there is. So this was really representative of yes, of growth and the natural world. So yeah, I see some of the comments coming in. Is there anything that anybody wants me to speak to as part of the design?
Okay, Katie, we do have a question coming in from Valerie. Thanks, Valerie. She's asking, how do you decide what you are going to create?
That's a good question. Sometimes I think it's instinctual. I usually start with sketching. So I'll get my sketchbook out, my pencil, and I don't use digital platforms. Like I and nothing against that, right? Like I know it's very popular to use the iPad and the pencil and that digital forming, but I like to more old school. I do the sketching, and I'll just sit with it for a little bit. I'll sit with the colors in my mind, with the themes, with the concepts. Also, you know, I do let creativity kind of flow, and I do like certain concepts. So, like the sun. The sun is a very common, like natural design that I like to use. So I thought, you know, it would be fitting to use the sun as a central piece for this panel. Yeah, and I would like to compliment the colors. I can't take credit for the colors here because this is the colors already chosen for me, and they are just gorgeous. I love these colors, like one of my favorite color combinations.
I'm so glad that that all came together when we were talking sort of inspiration and color palette. And I just echo, you know, Katie, you're seeing the comments come through as well. I mean, I think folks are just so blown away by your creativity, the color palette. If you're happy for me to pitch a few more questions your way, I can continue to do that. Oh, and Kimberly, I see you raised your hand. So since you're willing to share your question, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I was just wondering your technique. Do you use a single bead or double bead or thread? Sorry, needle. Do you use a single needle or a double needle when you're beading? Because your lines are very, very straight and perfect.
Thank you. I actually use 4 beads at a time. So I'll do like the 4 beads, and then I'll come up between 2, and then I'll go through the beads. But then I also do an extra step, which is tacking every bead down. So that, I think that's the step that actually gets them nice and straight and flat, is the tacking down of the thread.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one more question, just more in terms of culturally? And when you're beading, do you do a preparation in terms of when you sit down to bead? Are there any like sort of cultural preparations that you do in sort of for your intentions to be around beading? Because when I bead, I find it, although frustrating at times, a sort of mindfulness. Like if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, you're gonna have to rip it out. So it's nice to be able to focus on what you're doing, and it helps to distract other things from your life as well. So just wondering what your process is.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. I do, I try to be aware of my mind frame when I'm beading. So trying to sit down and beading with a good mind is really important to me. And also depending on where it's going, I do believe that like the energies that we carry translate into the work that we do. And so I always try to make sure that I am in a good space before I start to work, but also too, like it naturally kind of puts me in a good space as well, because you're right, it is a mindfulness practice. And I did want to talk about that. I had another slide, but I had to take it out because I thought it may have went too long. I had a few slides of work I did with students. So some of the work I did in schools, me and my colleague, who is the social worker at the UIC, we would run student wellness groups. And so we would bring students together in a circle and we would talk about different topics, and we would bring beading with us. So we would teach students how to bead. And it would really help to have the students focused on something that's in their hands, and really be in a space where they're working on something, focusing on something. So it's not, so we're not sitting there looking at each other or I think it helped with the students who are a bit more shy, a little bit more quiet, and brought in this feeling of like being in the moment, focusing on what you're working on, and also bringing in that cultural piece too of learning a cultural practice. So yeah, I can keep talking about that, but I'll stop.
I think you have a captive audience here of like-minded folks around mindfulness and actually one of the questions, Katie, and I'm filtering through here, so I'll just kind of pop around in our chat. But one of the questions that came through is can beading be used for healing for self and others? So I think you sort of expressed that. You talked a little bit about using this with youth as well. Is there anything else you'd like to share along those lines?
Yes. Sorry, I'm just going to read the question one more time.
Sure,
For self and for others. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yes, I believe that it is. And I also wanted to say that beading is different for each individual, right? So some beaders bead for income. Some beaders bead for regalia and power dancing. Some beaders bead for self-care. Some beaders bead for art galleries. Some have a combination. I don't know what everybody purpose for creating their art is. So I just wanted to put that out there too, that like everybody has different outlooks on art. This is mine and this is my experience. So I will share that I've done beading groups, and one in particular was for a long time. I did a community beading group at the Native Center. I actually taught there for 8 years, facilitated that every single Tuesday. And there at one time before the pandemic, there was a group of women that would come together, and it was mainly women. There was sometimes men who would come, but this was mainly a group of women who came together every Tuesday and brought our beadwork and food and ourselves and conversation. And in that group, there were women from all over the place, all walks of life, all experiences. And a lot of the feedback that I got was that this was a place that they needed, that, coming to this group every week was something that was really important to their well-being, of connecting to other people. I had a lot of individuals come who were elderly or with disabilities who didn't really go out much, aside from coming to the beading group. So a lot of feedback that I got was that it was, it was just a place that they needed to be, and a place that was fulfilling to them, and a place for connecting. So I really truly believe that it can be healing for others, the active beading, but also beading in circles with other people.
Thank you so much for elaborating and sharing that that time in your life when you were facilitating that work. And just before I, have our eye on the time too, but before we switch off this image, just a couple technical questions for you, Katie, as I'm going back through the chat. The diagonal pink and purple lines, I think you were sharing with us that there's some representation of thunderers and lightning. Am I getting that right for those diagonal lines, or do you have some other meaning behind the other use of the pink lines in the image?
Yeah, those were representing of the thunder and lightning.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. I'm wondering if we should maybe switch to the next image while I continue to pitch you
Sure.
questions. Does that work for you? Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Some of the other technical questions that have come through, Katie, is how are you beading? Are you beading onto canvas, hide, in general, or perhaps also in relation to these pieces, if you don't mind sharing?
I'm beading onto a felt. So it's a felt that it's called FlexiFirm. It's not your normal felt. It's I'm having a hard time. It's just like stiff. It's stiffened felt, probably with adhesive. So it's easier to bead onto. That's what I usually use.
Great, thanks for sharing that with us as well. And wondering, how long does a panel take you to complete, from design phase to sewing and beading?
So a panel this size, I actually did time roughly, not exactly, but roughly how long each of these panels took. And they took from start to finish about 40 hours each.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I think, Lisa, I know you just flagged in the chat that you have a question. Did you want to unmute and come on screen to pose your question?
Yes, I couldn't find, I don't have my hand, lift up my hand thing.
Oh,
So
no problem. We can hear you.
I should have just been, hey. Thank you for sharing. I have a question around, because it's very sensitive, and I work in a school, I'm a social worker in the school. I've been in the communities, more in the Ojibwe community for the last 35 years. But it's the cultural appropriation that schools are very hesitant to bring in different things, because they're afraid of being, I guess, slapped on the hands. I don't know if there's another better way of saying it, but what is your take or advice around that?
Around cultural appropriation, or is it more around bringing in beadwork into schools?
Right, bringing in a beadwork, would people see it as an offensive culture appropriation, or is it by naming it, realizing where it's from?
Yeah. When I used to work at the Urban Indigenous Education Center, we would really encourage discussion around cultural appropriation first. So yeah, so talking about it, what is it as versus cultural appreciation, what is appropriate, what is not. Talking about like best practices in bringing Indigenous art into school. I've taught beading to many non-Indigenous people and students, and I think like being also aware of like the designs that we're choosing, right? Because beadwork itself exists all around the world in different cultures.
Yes.
And I think what in Indigenous beadwork, symbolism is really, really important. Yeah, I don't think there's some things that are not appropriate to recreate and to bead, but other things are okay. You know, I had a student who beaded some Picasso designs using beads. And I also, we used to always encourage like bringing in guests to schools. So bringing in Indigenous knowledge keepers and beaders and artists to teach instead of, the teachers.
Yes, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
want to
So
make sure that message is well appropriate and that they understand well, not that, I don't know, beading a sacred item, but that they understand all the teachings that go with it.
yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks so much for the questions, everyone. And I know our time is running short. So Katie, I wanted to make sure to leave you the floor. I know we brought up a second piece. If there was anything you wanted to share about your vision for this piece, and I think we have a couple more slides of pieces we wanted to unveil to you all here as the first virtual sort of exhibit of the remainder of Katie's pieces. So I don't know, in like 2 or 3 minutes, we could probably try to move through those if that worked for you.
Yes. So this second panel, again, thinking about growth and that concept of moving forward together. This piece is really like happy. That's the feeling I got from this piece. Obviously, like the sun shining onto the flowers and the colors in the sky, and then the earth on the right behind that other flower, and in the middle is water. So the flowing of a river, the water, the life that water gives. I really wanted to incorporate that element as well. So this one, very, similar ideas, but in a different way, in different image. And I wanted to incorporate floral work too, because that's my love is floral work. So really wanted to incorporate that in this piece.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. And on that note, there's one more slide where we have a lot of gorgeous floral work we'll put up to share.
Yeah, so here's the 4 icons, the beaded icons, which just a continuation of the florals. I thought it would be really, really nice to bring the other 2 pieces together with these little icons here.
They're just beautiful, Katie. I wish we had made this a 2-hour conversation with you, because I think we could all keep going. So it would be so lovely to think of other ways to have you back and joining us. But this work, your work, we just cannot thank you enough on behalf of everyone who's here. I think I can share that on behalf of our members, our board, our CEO, and our staff. We almost don't have the words to just say how honored we are to hold a piece of your art in good care and connection with you. And I know someone asked, where can we see these pieces? So really the purpose and the impetus behind these is that they will stay very present at OASW, and into communications with our members is the goal. So you'll see these being used when we're talking to you through your email, on our website. Katie's work will also grace the cover of our strategic plan, which is coming up for the next 5 years. And we also have this beautiful photography, which will be exhibited in our office as well. And then some safekeeping of the art in addition, with Katie's guidance. So we can't thank you enough, Katie. It's been so lovely to collaborate with you. Thank you for meeting and trusting and partnering with us in the process. And we just couldn't think of a better time to connect with you during National Indigenous History Month. And thanks again. I really don't know what more to say, except we're just so thrilled. I think the work's beautiful, and lots of great comments coming in.
Yeah, I'm reading all of your comments. I've seen every single one of them, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for your feedback and for the invitation. And I agree, it was just such a beautiful collaboration, and I feel really happy, and my heart is full. So thank you, everybody.
Awesome. That is such a great note to end on this beautiful day. If you can get out and stretch and get your feet on the land, please do so. And again, thank you, Katie, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your day.